I think we're good. I have a little one-page front and back thing that we're going to go through. So I'm just going to start them down the center aisle here, and just please take one and pass it along. I made 50 copies, so if we run out, you may have to do a little sharing.
Are you focusing on her primarily?
Yeah, it's on auto too.
Okay.
Now, this should be recorded. Looks like
If I see that light, yeah. Is there status up there?
It's good to see you all here on the first Sunday in January 2020. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? So I wanted to start off by just sharing with you a gift that Harriet Cannell handed to me this morning. Fresh out, just hot off the press. She found this headline in today's Oregonian. If you can't read it, it says, Pritchard bloodied but not beaten. And I have no idea what it really, referred to. Probably some kind of sporting thing. But I thought it was appropriate that today we should be lifting up the fact that this is a struggle that all of us have certainly been involved in, and I am among those who've been working hard to find a way forward for our church. We do have a few seats up in the front, and we can pull out some more seats if you would like to sit rather than stand. So please make yourself comfortable. I'm just going to jump right in, and I want to start by giving you just a little bit of background for the news that came out this week. And then I'm going to go through the key points of the protocol that was announced and the agreement that has been reached. And we'll take questions from you. So I just want to remind you of how we got here. If you think all the way back to 2016, when Portland, Oregon hosted the General Conference, the global gathering of United Methodists, and you all were fabulous stars in that event. And at that General Conference, we came very close to splitting as a church over the question of LGBTQ inclusion or exclusion. And it was played out in a lot of ways geographically, in terms of different areas of the world where there are different cultural standards and understandings of sexuality. But it was also played out politically, because the General Conference really, when you get right down to it, it is a political gathering. And it was, we were very close. A lot of people were very anxious. There was incredible tension. And then someone made the suggestion that was adopted that the Council of Bishops should appoint a commission to study some potential ways to move forward together, that we would put the fight on hold while the commission did its work, and then there would be a special General Conference session. Most of you know that there were 30 people on the commission on the way forward from all over the world. I was privileged to be one of those 30. We worked for 3 years. We brought a plan which I thought would have been very helpful and would have resolved our impasse. It was not accepted at a special session in February of 2019. And instead, what was adopted was something that has been known as the traditionalist plan, which is much more restrictive and punitive against LGBTQIA clergy, people who identify in that manner, and also against clergy who perform weddings for same-gendered couples. Those restrictions, those punitive laws, went into effect January 1st, just a few days ago. So this agreement is very timely in that part of what it does is it addresses those charges. I'm concerned about those of you that are standing. Anybody want a chair? This is an opportunity. You can come grab a chair. If not, whatever. So that's kind of where we've been. Now, in about August, well, let me back up also and tell you that In the Western jurisdiction, we have made it plain that we will not abide by the rules of the traditional plan. And I made that statement, as you recall, on the floor of General Conference at the very end. And since that time, the Western jurisdiction has been working to find ways to resist the traditionalist plan and to work toward a restructuring of the church that would provide for inclusive ministry in a broad way. There are 10 people, 5 lay people, and 5 clergy from around the Western jurisdiction. That's everybody from Colorado to Guam and from Alaska to Arizona. These 10 people were elected at a summit gathering in Los Angeles in November, and they are working to develop some specific structural changes and some models and visions for what the new church, the new Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, could be. I'm very proud and happy to tell you that our own Paul Cosgrove is one of those 10 who was elected. And we got to give him a lot of support, encouragement, and prayers, especially since I'm pretty sure he is probably the only person over 50, or certainly over 60, on that team, and one of the few white males. So you go, Paul. Because a lot of the work of this body is trying to figure out how to be as radically inclusive as possible across the board, not only in terms of LGBTQ populations, but also in terms of ethnic populations and people of color. So, in about August or so, Bishop, my mind just went blank, from Sierra Leone, began to have some conversation with other bishops from the central jurisdictions, that's outside the U.S., and a few within the U.S., to talk about how can we create a mediation team to come prepared to have buy-in to the General Conference in May, which will be held in Minneapolis, so that we don't end up in the same place where we're at an impasse and everybody goes home hurt and angry and still fighting. So there were 16 people that were asked to be a part of this mediation team. And they came from every theological spectrum that is present within our larger global church. And they came as representatives of various lobby groups and political parties within the church. So the folks representing the Good News movement were there, the folks representing the Confessing movement, the folks connected with the Wesley Covenant Association, with the United Methodist, with the Way Forward, UM Forward, with Reconciling Ministries Network, with the Methodist Federation for Social Action. It was just really a broad spectrum of folks. I was fortunate that I was invited to serve as a part of an advisory group to the progressives on the team, so that every time that they were in the room and they were given a proposal, they would immediately text him. There were about 4 of us on this team, and say, "Can you get on a Zoom call now?" And so we would all call in, and we would hear what the proposal was, and we would give them our input regarding whether we thought it was something that could be pursued, and maybe it could be tweaked in some way, so that those folks who were at the table representing the progressive view also felt supported. And I think that was an important piece of that process. So they met, I think about 3 times in person, face-to-face, this team, and they were gifted with the incredible work of a high-powered mediator, a fellow by the name of Feinberg, right? Who was doing all of this work for pro bono, which is pretty amazing. And to give you an idea of his credentials, he was primary mediator relating with the 9/11 survivors, and also very involved in the BP oil spill. and I think also in the Roundup litigation. So we were very, very, very fortunate to have his skill. And what came out of it, which was just recently released, is this protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation. So right away, it needs to be said, this is an agreement that allows for a gracious exit for a portion of the church. What it does mean is that we who want to be more inclusive are not the ones leaving. Okay, so the United Methodist Church, if this passes at General Conference, the United Methodist Church post-separation will be us, people that are center and progressive, people that want the big tent. And the folks who would be leaving would be those who would favor the more traditionalist plan related to sexuality and the more exclusive understanding of who gets to be in the church and who gets to be a leader in the church. So the intent of this protocol is to restructure the United Methodist Church as the best means to resolve differences while allowing each part of the church to remain true to its own theological understanding. So the point is, it's hoping to allow for theological authenticity and missional integrity wherever you stand on this issue. Also, it proposes separation as a faithful step with the possibility of continued cooperation around matters of shared interest. So for instance, one of the great things that the United Methodist Church has accomplished in the last 10 years is the near eradication of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. We raised millions of dollars and really attacked that, and we've been very successful. Those kinds of things we can do better with larger numbers, obviously. And those are places where we need each other. It's easy to agree to cooperate when it's a clear human need. So this would allow for that continued cooperation in terms of mission. It also would allow, I believe, for the possibility of reunification at some point in the future. One of the things that's important to remember is our United Methodist history, which says that throughout the entire time that we've been a Methodist movement, we have had various separations. The one that most people remember and point to most easily was around slavery, right around the time of the Civil War, when the Methodist Episcopal Church in the United States split to become the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Those are the folks that wanted to be slave owners, or to think it was okay to be slave owner, and the Methodist Episcopal Church North. Eventually, those two groups did come back together in 1939 to form the Methodist Church, which is the predecessor body to the United Methodist Church. That's one of the larger splits historically, but there have been many others as well. And in many of those cases, people will go away for a time and then eventually come back. So here's some of the agreements and commitments that the folks at the table made to this protocol. Number one, that those people would continue to work together to draft the legislation that will be necessary to enact these tenets at General Conference. One of the little quirks of our system is that the General Conference is the legislative body of the church, and there will be about 832 voting delegates from all over the world, and they are the only ones that can speak for the whole church. They're the ones that determine everything that's in our book of discipline, and that's where all of our anxiety gets fleshed out in very real ways. The normal procedure for legislation coming to General Conference has a deadline for submitting of September 1st because it all has to be translated into 4 different languages. And there is a way, however, to get this legislation that is still being produced in, and that is one annual conference somewhere in the world has to vote to bring this legislation. And my understanding is they've already arranged for several annual conferences to do that through a special session prior to the May General Conference. So these groups that I named earlier, representing the full spectrum of theological understanding, will work together to write the legislation to enact the protocol. This is very important. They have agreed that no party will bring any claim or support any claim for additional assets of the post-separation United Methodist Church, that's us, or any of the denominations that may arise from this protocol. So in other words, if you sign on to this, and if it is adopted by General Conference, that's the end of litigation. You can no longer go after, the assets of one or the other denominations. So in terms of the process and the timeline, this is a little bit fuzzy, it's still being worked out, but basically the central conferences, people outside the United States, they may choose with a 2/3 vote to affiliate with a Methodist denomination pursuant to the protocol. That means they may choose to leave the United Methodist Church if they vote with a 2/3 affirmative vote. If a central conference does not vote, the default position is they remain in the United Methodist Church. They remain with us, okay? Likewise, annual conferences may choose to vote on whether to leave the United Methodist Church for the new denomination. And if an annual conference does not vote, the default is to remain United Methodist. Likewise, any local church may choose to vote to leave the United Methodist Church for one of the new denominations pursuant to the protocol. You can't just, say, I'm going to leave and become First Church of Donna, which we all know would be fabulous. But you could vote to say, well, we're going to go with that traditional body and be a part of them now. If a local church does not vote, again, the default is you remain a part of the United Methodist Church. And there are timelines for when these votes must take place. So let's talk about money. A local church affiliating with a Methodist denomination, the new denomination, leaving the UMC, would retain its assets and its liabilities. Okay, so this is basically what we're doing here is we're saying we're setting aside the trust clause of our Book of Discipline that says local churches don't own their property, it all belongs to the annual conference. We're setting that aside for a time for the purpose of making these decisions. Should a local church disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church and not become a part of a new Methodist denomination pursuant to this protocol, then it has to go back to the current Book of Discipline and the restrictions that are placed there on that. So then, annual conferences, jurisdictional conferences, and central conferences, they will all retain their property, their assets, and their liabilities, regardless of which way they want to go. Okay, so whether they stay or whether they leave, they take their property, their assets, and their liabilities with them. In addition, a total sum of $25 million shall be paid to the Traditionalist Methodist denomination, that's the new Methodist denomination, by the United Methodist Church over the next 4 years. Now that sounds like, a huge amount of money. I gotta tell you, it's nowhere near where the negotiations started. So while it was a little bit more than I wanted, it was hugely beneficial in terms of where it ended. In addition, a sum of $2 million will be set aside by the United Methodist Church for payment to potential additional Methodist denominations. Now that's not going to go very far, particularly if there's like many of them that spring up, because the total amount is $2 million. And then this is another piece of the agreement that is, I believe, very groundbreaking and spirit-inspired. As an acknowledgement of the historical role of the Methodist movement in systems of systematic racial violence, exploitation, and discrimination, and as a fair and just step in addressing the impact of such harm, a sum of $39 million shall be allocated over the next 8 years to support communities historically marginalized by the sin of racism. $13 million of this sum will come from the new traditional Methodist denomination, and the remainder would be contributed by the United Methodist Church. The money would go to strengthen ministries by and for Asian, Black, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, Pacific Islander communities, and to encourage the full participation of historically marginalized communities in the decision-making of the church, and also to ensure the work of training the next generation of leaders by Africa University be continued. So, pension plans for clergy and lay employees would remain in place regardless of the Methodist denomination with which they affiliate. Yes. And all other property, assets, or liabilities of the United Methodist Church, including its general boards and agencies, shall remain with the United Methodist Church. Other Methodist denominations under this protocol shall have no claim or entitlement to such property, assets, or liabilities. This is huge. This means that what is protected here are the general reserves for the general boards and agencies, the folks like the Board of Church and Society, the Board of Higher Education and Ministry. Also protected are the assets of United Methodist universities, colleges, retirement homes, community centers. You know, we're talking billions of dollars in assets that now will remain with the United Methodist Church. I'll just tell a really quick story from, many of you are aware that we have a United Methodist building in Washington, D.C., and it sits directly across a little alley from the Supreme Court building and across the street from the Capitol building. Obviously a very important piece of property for anybody that wants to be helping to engage our government in terms of social justice issues, and has long been a kind of a beacon for the progressive movement and a lightning rod for those that don't agree. And at one point in the negotiations, it looked as if the building was going to be sold and the income split. Thankfully, there's at least one person in the progressive team who said, no way is that going to happen. And we have a tie to that building because Mary Beth Collins, one of our members who's now deceased, grew up in that building. Her father, Clarence True Wilson, was responsible for fundraising, buying the land, building the building, and running the work of the predecessor agency to Board of Church and Society. And Mary Beth used to tell stories of how she used to ride her tricycle along the Capitol Mall. And so a couple of years ago, I hosted a bishop and someone from there, well, that was actually the General Secretary of Church and Society. And we went over and visited with Mary Beth and got her permission for the building to be renamed after her father, the Clarence True Wilson building. And at the time, as we were leaving, I turned to Sally Dick, who was the bishop, and I said, Bishop, this is probably a ploy to protect that asset, isn't it? And she said, well, of course it is. And thankfully, you know, we didn't have to go there because the team saw the wisdom of hanging on to that for the United Methodist Church. And then the last item is about those restrictions and those chargeable offenses and all of the punitive stuff that went into effect with January 1st. This protocol calls for all administrative and judicial processes addressing restrictions in the Book of Discipline related to self-avowed practicing homosexuals or same-sex weddings shall be held in abeyance beginning January 1st, 2020, and clergy remain in good standing while such complaints are on hold. So, in other words, what it does is it says nobody can be, all the trials, all the charges, none of that can go forward. Now, so what I have given you is kind of what I saw as the key points. If you want to read the whole protocol, I'll put a link to it on our website and on in our newsletter. It's about 20 pages, something like that. But it also talks about, and this is where the timeline I think is quite fuzzy and not necessarily well thought out yet, because it talks about if this protocol is accepted by the General Conference delegates in May, that there would be an immediate cessation of, they would call that General Conference session to a close, so that those who wanted to leave the denomination could leave, and those that were choosing to remain would stay and have another session in which they begin to talk about things like removing immediately all of the prohibitive language from the Book of Discipline related to LGBTQ persons. And there's also a legislation already coming to the General Conference to create regional conferences, with the U.S. being a regional conference, for instance. And that would also be a part of this protocol, that we would see this as being the necessary work of the new United Methodist Church, would be these regional conferences. So I mentioned that our jurisdiction has been doing some brainstorming and has been, talking about what's next. As you might imagine, there are a number of people, not only in the West, but around the world, who are saying, let's not waste a good crisis. This is the time to be bold and to really make some incredible, changes to the structure and the governance of the church. My hope is that work will not stop. My hope is that we will, in fact, be able to pass this protocol at General Conference, and that what it will do is give us the breathing space we need to continue to work to reform the church and to create a structure in line with 21st century as opposed to the past. So that's my hope and prayer, and we will continue to be involved in that, certainly through the jurisdictional work and the larger church as well. If anybody is, I know Paul is planning to go to General Conference. I'll be there on one of the reserve delegates. If anyone else is interested in going, I think it could be a very fascinating historical time, and we will find ways for you to help. Because, as I said, it is a political gathering, and there is always a lot of conversation and work that needs to happen along the edges. Yes, Dee?
The moratorium part, I think this is wonderful. Having worked for divorce lawyers, I know we've not worked related to this mediation, and I think it's great. I'm a little bit puzzled how, they're going to stop the trials as of last week, but this does not go into effect until it's voted on.
Correct.
So everybody's just agreeing that they're going to just kind of...
Correct. Yeah, they're assuming that nothing else can happen while we're considering this. And this is similar to when in 2016 we said that there would be a moratorium on charges while the Commission on the Way Forward did its work. And then remember what happened in July? At Western Jurisdiction, we elected the first openly lesbian bishop, which was, that was a bit of a breaking of the moratorium. But it also was a way that I think it was an action that pushed the church to get to this point. So I think it had its positive affect. as well. Yes?
Donna, this outcome seems remarkably different to me than we thought it might be a few months ago. Is that true? I mean, how did we get from there to here?
I think what has happened, what transpired is the traditionalist folks, the folks who are wanting the church to be more closed, I think they were shocked at the backlash to the traditional plan passing. Across the world, people made very bold statements saying, we will not abide by these rules. And we will be looking to create something different. And in addition to that, it played out politically last June during the annual conference sessions, when the voting delegates to this May's conference were elected. And across the board, there were like these broad sweeps of progressive delegates being elected. And I think that totally took the more conservative folks by surprise. In Western Europe, they've been making some very strong statements about non-compliance as well. And even in a few places in Africa, there have been those kinds of statements made. So I think the tide is turning, and I think that the folks who cannot stay in what I would consider a more big tent, contextual conference kind of understanding, they needed a way to leave with grace and dignity, and with some resources to help them begin again. Yes?
Well, those traditionalists, will they still want to use the word Methodist in their title?
I suspect that they may. Right now there is a body that has already, they already have drafted corporation papers, and that's the Wesleyan Covenant Association. And that may become their denomination name, or it may be something with Methodist in it. We don't know that at this point. Yes?
How large is the traditionalist group as a part of the total?
That's an excellent question. Depends on who you ask. It really does depend on who you ask. In terms of geography, they have their most support from the southeast part of the United States, and from Africa, and from the Philippines. Even in those places, though, not everybody will go with them. So it's really hard to say. My personal feeling, and again, call me Pollyanna, I also thought the one church plan would pass. But my personal feeling is that not that many churches will choose to leave. For one thing, we all know that churches really don't like change, right? And so if you can hang in there with the status quo and do your thing the way you want to do it, why go to the trouble? And why open up the can of worms within your congregation if you don't have to? Yes?
If a conference votes to leave, and churches within that conference choose not to leave, can they then stay?
Yes. And what would happen is the local church would vote to stay, and then they're free to do that. So I saw a hand back here, yes?
How likely do you think it is that this protocol will be adopted?
I think it's very likely, and the reason I think it is because of the various signers onto it. They really are representative of all the groups that have been working hard to gather their political strength. Yes, Alan?
Donna, if I understand, if we do nothing, we stay.
That is correct.
I would like to have us consider doing something so we can stay active, that we want to stay, and we applaud the new direction.
That would be, we could certainly do that, make that kind of statement. Yes, Matthew?
So would our church vote as a whole if this protocol is adopted?
Our church would not have to vote if we wanted to stay. The only reason to vote is if you want to leave, but we could make a statement, if we felt strongly that we wanted to do that. Let me just say a word about what this means for us personally, as a local congregation. So I know you've heard me say this many times over the last 4 or 5 years. we are going to continue to be the church we need to be. We are going to continue to be open and inclusive of all persons with an eye to social justice, creation care, reconciling ministries, peace, all of the things that we hold dear to our hearts. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to care for people in the greater Portland area in myriad different ways, in terms of real needs, in terms of spiritual needs, the whole gamut. And we are not going to have to change who we are. What it also means, though, is that we can have a little breathing room, and we can be supported in being who we are. And we can then also use that space that's created to help be a part of whatever reformation needs to happen in the church as we move forward. Yes?
What are the financial implications for our church? Can you estimate that? And the financial implications, does that include assets maybe that the United Methodist Church owns? You talk about 39 million.
Right. The financial implications for every church that remains in the United Methodist Church will be to participate in through the apportionments, like we always do, in the payout of the 25 million to the, although I think most of that is already money in hand. But then also the 39, well, it's not 39 for us, it's 39 minus 13. What is that?
26.
Thank you. I'm looking to the mathematician over here. So we would then be apportioned our fair share of the 26 million over 8 years. So it's not a huge financial burden. Yes, Mark?
Well, what if a church goes against their annual conference and votes to stay in? Which conference will they become part of a different conference?
Yes, they would. And they may in fact end up with us. Who knows? We've actually, what's been interesting is since last February, we in the West have gotten a lot of inquiries from local churches outside the jurisdiction saying, oh, please could we come join you? And in fact, we've provided safe harbor for clergy who are identifying as LGBTQ, where we've actually moved their credentials here. Thank you very much to our friends from KTW. Any other questions? Yes, Martha.
That sounds like gerrymandering.
What does?
That redistricting stuff. I'm just kidding.
Not the right
Do you anticipate more disagreements when it comes down to determine which language is actually going to be removed from the book of discipline, or is it that everyone is already knows what's coming out?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's an agreed upon thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the term United Methodist Church encompass both traditional and progressive congregations? And for signage, would there be a need for just you're the United Methodist Church and people will be left to find out whether it's a traditional or progressive congregation, or should it be noted that we are United Methodist Church traditional?
Well, no, we don't need to do that, because if this passes, the United Methodist Church are the folks who are wanting to be open. The other group will have a different name. And we don't know yet what they will choose as their name, but they will not be the United Methodist Church.
Donna, a round of applause.
I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you and to note your support in this work and your active involvement with it as well. So thank you all very much.